Hi, it's Katrina. Think you've seen all history has to offer? Think again. Our planet is bursting with hidden wonders, ancient cities, and forgotten sites beyond your imagination. Today, we are unlocking the secrets of history and taking you on a journey to historical places you didn't even know existed, like a fortress in the clouds, a crumbling castle, and a necromancer's dark temple. If that sounds good, be sure to subscribe and let's go. The Greek Temple of Necromancy. There is an ancient temple in Greece so crazy that I can't believe that more people don't know about it. It might be the only surviving temple of necromancers anywhere in the world. Necromancy sounds like something from a fantasy RPG, your character resurrecting skeletons to battle on your behalf. But necromancy was very real, especially in ancient Greece. Necromancers devoted themselves to Hades, lord of the dead, and Persephone, his begrudging bride. Necromancers worshipped their dark gods at a place called the Necromanteion. These temples of the damned weren't as prolific as temples dedicated to Apollo, god of the sun, but they were around. The only one left is the Necromanteion of Acheron. I've been making it sound kind of spooky, and it definitely was. But the Necromanteion wasn't used by black magic practitioners to resurrect the dead. The word translates to Oracle of the Dead. People visited the Necromanteion to commune with their deceased ancestors. As such, necromancer temples were often found near larger temples dedicated to more mainstream gods. For example, the Temple of Poseidon at Tainaron had a small Necromanteion where worshippers could reach out to their ancestors. One of the biggest was the Necromanteion of Acheron. You might be wondering how people went about communicating with the deceased. You couldn't just show up and start talking to your late Uncle Joe. Speaking to the dead required magic and ritual. Those who wished to speak once more with a dead loved one had to meet in front of the Necromanteion, which looked sort of like a small ziggurat. They feasted on pork and barley and oysters for some weird reason. Then they consumed a psychoactive narcotic. The narcotic likely had an effect similar to heroin. These people were heavily influenced by the drug and then were allowed into the corridors to chant and pray. Once inside, like something straight out of Cirque du Soleil, the priest would appear out of the floor and start flying through the temple. It sounds ridiculous, but researchers are pretty sure this is what happened. The priest was hoisted through the air on a series of theatrical cranes used in Greek theater. Everyone hoping to speak to their dead friends, blitzed out of their minds on narcotics, would have been thoroughly freaked out. They likely woke up hours later confused, but convinced they had raised the dead. In 1958, archaeologists discovered what they believed to be the Necromanteion of Acheron. Researcher Sotirios Dakaris confirmed it to be the real house of Hades. This was based on its geographical position and description from ancient writers like Herodotus and Homer. Not everyone is convinced the ruin is the real deal. Some experts think it wasn't a temple at all, but a farmhouse. Here's a snapshot of it. Does this look like somewhere necromancers would hang out? The Lost Urartu Castle. High on top of a snowy peak in eastern Turkey, a team of archaeologists unearthed something mysterious. At a staggering 8,200 feet, hidden in the icy embrace of the mountain, they stumbled upon a sight unseen for centuries, a forgotten castle. This wasn't just any ruin, it was a colossal structure. The team soon uncovered ancient walls and a cistern for holding water, ceramic fragments, and so much more. They had soon revealed the outline of a massive castle built 2,800 years ago. This was left over by the mysterious kingdom of Urartu, or the kingdom of Van. The Urartians were the ones who built this magnificent fortress. Their reign, a mere flicker in the grand scheme of history, spanned from roughly 860 BC to 590 BC. They were the architects of these mountaintop giants. Historians speculate they rose to power during the decline of the Assyrian Empire, but were swept away once the Assyrians regained their strength. Scientific analysis confirms the unusual preservation of the castle walls, defying the expected decay for a 2,800-year-old structure. How is it possible that the castle walls remained largely intact and hidden for so long? The castle was partially buried, so it's possible that this protected it from the elements that typically cause decay. The castle itself stood as a solitary sentinel, a silent guardian of secrets locked away for millennia. Now, under the watchful gaze of the unforgiving Eastern Turkish sky, the whispers of the past began to stir once more. The human face in the Amazon. In the Amazon rainforest, a recent drought revealed a series of human faces sculpted in stone. The faces appeared from the water like the shrieking ancestors of Amazonian tribes who have experienced drought in the ancient past. It's no secret that it's hot. You might even be a little sweaty right now. But guess what? It was also hot 2,000 years ago, and dry as well. That's how old the strange human faces are, carved into the stone. They were created 2 millennia ago when the Amazon suffered from an earlier drought. The haunting stone faces were spotted at the very place where the Rio Negro meets the Solimões River. Typically, you'd never be able to see the faces because they would be underneath the raging river. But because the rain stopped falling from the sky, the river started drying up. Here's how destructive the drought is for Brazil. The Rio Negro is the biggest tributary of the Amazon River, and it lost 50 feet of water. Atmospheric scientist René Garriod called the whole situation unusual and extreme. But what do these faces mean in this isolated jungle habitat? Who carved them into the stone, and why? Did they serve as a warning? Perhaps a forgotten tribe left these faces in the river as a way to warn whoever might see them again that famine and flame are soon to follow. It's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to Mike Me Mine and Beers Frontiers for supporting this channel practically since the beginning. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. The medieval hermit's house. Archaeologists found a medieval hermit's house in the middle of an English field. The hermit had given up all his worldly possessions and fled into the middle of nowhere to be away from civilization. I'm sure we can all sympathize at least a little bit with the hermit. The big shock came later when archaeologists realized the hermit built his house on top of a prehistoric henge. This is a rare case in which archaeologists know the name of the hermit. He's actually a saint, Saint Guthlac. The details of his exceptional life were written down in Latin after his death in 714. Guthlac was an Anglo-Saxon nobleman with all the riches and privileges he could ever want, but he gave it all up, threw away his money and his life of nobility to live a solitary existence dedicated to God. Although the details of his life were known, researchers didn't know where his hermit hut was. Scientists from Newcastle University said they had been trying to find it for years. They suspected it was in a field near Anchor Church. However, they were never able to excavate because the field was being used in agricultural activity. They couldn't just go digging holes like a bunch of moles. Thankfully, they finally got a chance in 2021. That was when they found the ruins of the hermit's house. Then, in 2022, the university scientists found the unexpected. Saint Guthlac lived 1,300 years ago, but his house was built on an ancient henge from 5,000 years ago. What kind of devout hermit built his house on the ruins of an ancient henge? Out of all the places he could have erected his home, why right on a henge? This magical monument was huge when it still stood, almost 50 feet across. Researchers have called it one of the largest henges ever found in England. It would have been an important place during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. People gathered here to participate in ceremonial activities. By the time the Anglo-Saxons showed up, the henge had already been deserted for centuries. But because it was such a substantial monument, researchers have speculated it maintained its significance to the medieval locals. The medieval folk may not have known what it was, but they knew the henge was important. Perhaps Saint Guthlac recognized the magic of the henge, and that was why he built his house on it. The Ayaz-Kala Fortress. One of the most impressive fortresses in the world is located in a country that most people have never heard of before. The fortress is called Ayaz-Kala, and it can be found on top of a dusty rock outcrop in rural Uzbekistan. According to folk legend, this desert ruin was once home to the mythical warrior slave Malik Ayaz. His name isn't well known in the Western world, but he is known throughout Central Asia and Turkey as a major folklore hero. To make things more impressive, he was a real person. Malik Ayaz began life as a Georgian slave, but rose to be a general in the army of the Ghaznavid Empire during the 10th century. He was such a powerful figure that stories have been told about him for the past 1,000 years. One story is that in the stronghold of Ayaz-Kala, he shacked up with an Amazon princess. The fortress itself dates to long before Malik Ayaz was born. It was built around the 2nd century AD, at the height of the Kushan Empire. The Kushan Empire spanned Afghanistan, northern India, parts of Iran, Pakistan, and a few other modern countries. They were practically unstoppable. The Kushans were great patrons of Buddhism thanks to Emperor Kanishka. They also practiced Zoroastrianism. Historians think their focus on more peaceful religions led to an unprecedented 2 centuries without war. Back to the fortress of Ayaz-Kala. It was one of many, part of a sweeping mainstay that prevented invasion. The fortresses were built all along the frontier land to protect the Kushan Empire's thriving oases from desert raiders and savage nomads. Each fortress was within visible distance of the other. If an enemy appeared on the horizon, one fortress could light the signal fire and send word that they needed help. This was all 19 centuries ago. Nowadays, almost none of the original fortresses still stand. The most impressive is Ayaz-Kala, looking like a giant built a sandcastle on the top of a small mountain in the desert. India's Cursed Temple. One of the most enigmatic temples in India can be found in the heart of Calcutta, not exactly in the middle of nowhere. Kalighat Temple is entrenched in the chaotic urban center, but that doesn't make it any less mysterious. Despite being a place of pilgrimage for hundreds of years, nobody knows how the temple even got to where it is today. The religious building is dedicated to Kali. In Hinduism, Kali is a goddess that should be feared with every ounce of your being. She is the goddess of time. Okay, not too scary, but she is also the goddess of doomsday and death. She is the mistress of the apocalypse. She is sometimes known as Black Kali, or the Black Goddess. Her origins are as mysterious as her temple in Kolkata. Scholars believe she was created by tribes living in the mountains of Southeast Asia. She was a creature of death that didn't always have a name. Kali just sort of evolved from the gloom to become a goddess in the 6th century AD. Ever since, she's been associated with all things terrifying. You may have seen Kali before and not even realized it. She can be recognized by her blackish-blue skin, ridiculously long tongue, heaps of arms, and a necklace of decapitated human heads. She's also usually depicted holding a human head in each of her hands. Her skirt is grotesquely made from human arms. There is no indication of when the Kalighat Temple was built. Some think it's more than 2,000 years old, which would predate Kali's first appearance in Hindu lore. It might be one of the oldest places of worship in Calcutta, perhaps used as a sacred site for an even older deity of death and doom. There is another legend associated with the temple that says Kali's idol manifested itself on its own. Nobody brought the idol to the temple, it just appeared out of thin air, all to gain praise from the measly humans. Worshippers at the temple have experienced more phenomena than I can recount. Devotees have had miraculous visions, they've had epiphanies and revelations. The whole temple is said to radiate with an unexplainable mystical aura or energy. Some are so overwhelmed by the presence of an unknown spirit that they can't handle being inside. There is a rumor going around that Kali's temple was built above a secret network of tunnels and chambers which lead way down into the earth. There have never been excavations to find these alleged tunnels, so I can't say if they are real or not. Like everything else at this ancient temple, they remain fogged in myth. Sundaland and alternate histories. Tens of thousands of years before the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt rose to conquer the world, there was another advanced civilization. You already know its name. The Greek writer Plato called it Atlantis. He claimed the civilization was destroyed by a flood brought on by angry gods. Pseudo-archaeologist Graham Hancock said Atlantis was destroyed by a series of comet strikes. The question I ask you today is, what truly happened to Atlantis? Is the theory of alternate civilizations in ancient history legitimate or off-the-wall crazy? If you've seen Ancient Apocalypse, the Netflix series presented by Graham Hancock, you're familiar with the theory. Hancock has used a bunch of ancient sites as alleged proof that there was a global civilization before the flood. For example, Ganang Padang in Indonesia, which Graham believes was part of a lost civilization on an ancient landmass called Sundaland, or the Mexican Pyramid of Cholula, the largest pyramid on the planet. Graham Hancock said the pyramid is connected to an alien god whom the ancients worshipped as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. I want to talk a little bit more about Sundaland. It used to be a large landmass encompassing almost all of Southeast Asia. Today, Sundaland is largely underwater. Only some fragments of it are sticking out, like Java, Sumatra, Bali, and Borneo in Indonesia. What was once a solid continent is now a series of islands and peninsulas. Sundaland started sinking about 2.6 million years ago as global sea levels slowly began to rise. Since then, Sundaland has lost roughly half its landmass. The majority was lost during the last glacial period between 110,000 and 12,000 years ago. You may be wondering what any of this has to do with Atlantis, ancient civilizations, and Graham Hancock's series on alternate human timeline. Sundaland disappeared beneath the waves at around the same time Atlantis allegedly sank, or, according to Hancock, was blasted by meteorites. More scientific evidence is being found all the time that Sundaland was the cradle of a vast civilization. The populations of Taiwan and most of Southeast Asia likely came from Sundaland. The jungles of Indonesia have been home to strange civilizations for thousands of years. Could this have been the real Atlantis? When Sundaland flooded, could their people have sailed to different corners of the globe to establish new cultures? Vilcabamba. Vilcabamba was the last stronghold of the Inca Empire, but it remained lost in the jungle for centuries, only found in the 1980s. The discovery of this lost city was the most exciting thing to have happened since sliced bread. Vilcabamba is no easy place to get to. Even now that it's been found, archaeologists have to make a harrowing journey to reach its ruins. It takes more than 4 days of hiking through cloud forests deep into the Andean mountains. You have to walk over perilous plank bridges and hug cliff faces as you shimmy along narrow pathways. There are thick roots to break your ankles and wet, mossy rocks for you to slip on. But it's worth it to reach the very place where the Inca resisted the Spanish invaders for decades. Not just years, decades. Vilcabamba was where the Inca nobility fled because they knew the Spanish wouldn't find it. The Inca had a rough go of it. The Spanish landed in 1532, executed Incan Emperor Atahualpa, and then took over the Inca capital of Cusco. Their king and their capital were gone, and they had invaders with weird white skin and devastating weaponry. The Inca were in uncharted waters. They had been invaded by strange beings from a distant land. Those who could fled to their deepest stronghold in the jungle. Can you blame them? They just wanted to live as many years as they could away from the invaders. In the 1980s, Peru's deep jungle was under the control of guerrilla warfighters known as the Shining Path. When explorer Vincent Lee went looking for Vilcabamba, he was constantly at the mercy of hardened fighters. He was just as likely to catch a bullet as he was to find the lost sanctuary. But find it he did, totally overgrown. When speaking of his adventures later, Vincent said the jungle was so thick he could hardly see where one building ended and another began. Vincent and 3 government workers used machetes to hack away the vines and plants that had gobbled up Vilcabamba over the previous 400 years. They revealed a palace worthy of an Incan king. Inside the compound was a humongous hallway with 26 doorways. It was a royal labyrinth of rooms and staircases, like a city within a city. This was where the Inca went when every other place had fallen to their enemies. The Inca stayed hidden from the Spanish for so long that 4 kings ruled in Vilcabamba. It was their mountain refuge from which they sent guerrilla fighters to beat back the Spanish. It was the last hope for the rebellion, but it couldn't last forever. The Spanish learned where Vilcabamba was and set the city ablaze in 1572. The Spanish captured the last indigenous monarch. His name was Tupac Amaru I. And before you ask me, the answer is yes. Tupac is an Incan name. The Spanish dragged Tupac Amaru through the jungle to Cusco and executed him in front of everybody. This was the official end of the Inca Empire and of Vilcabamba. The Vainakh Towers. In the Caucasus Mountains of Russia are medieval towers that most people will never know exist. They were built in ancient times by unique cultures that most people also will never know existed. Cultures like the Chechen, Ingush, Kist, and Vainakh. Let me tell you about these people and their mystifying towers. The first towers were built in the mountains around the 1st century AD, likely a few years before Jesus Christ was born. Then they kept building them for almost 2,000 years. In Russia, the Vainakh Towers never went out of style. They only got more popular. The most active construction period was after the Middle Ages, between the 15th and 17th centuries. So many towers were built over such a long span of history that they can still be found all throughout the mountains. They look like gray, abandoned obelisks. What do you think they were for? Security, maybe? Perhaps for archers to shoot arrows at invaders? The truth is a little less obvious. Some of the towers were used for housing livestock and storing grain. Some of them were used for housing. Others may have been used for both. Tradition holds that each tower took no more than 1 year to build. Every family in a community with enough resources had to build one. That's why there are some places in the mountain where a bunch of towers are grouped together, like here at Torgim, an ancient and almost forgotten English village in the Asi Valley. The image is thanks to Alexander Polyakov. The village thrived in the 16th century, but as you can see now, nothing is left but the towers. They stand in a misty glade next to a river like something out of a fairy tale. I'll admit some of the towers were used for flinging arrows at invaders. Towers could be used as guard posts, for throwing stones at would-be conquerors, and for dumping boiling oil on greedy pillagers. Which method do you prefer? The Mountain Sanctuary of Zeus. In 2021, a team of archaeologists ventured to the tallest mountain on the Greek island of Aegina, Mount Elanio. The views don't get much more dramatic than this. The ancient mountain overlooks the blue Saronic Gulf, making you feel like you're standing on the top of Mount Olympus. And in a way, you are. The archaeological team found the remains of a temple built in the 4th century BC. The temple was dedicated to everyone's favorite lightning-wielding deity, Zeus. It was built by the civilization of the Mycenaeans. This temple wasn't just used as a place of worship. Judging by some other suspicious things archaeologists found nearby, it may have been used as a refuge by people fleeing the apocalypse. There are a few different layers here I need to break down. The temple itself is partially buried underneath a chapel. Nothing is left of the temple except its foundations and some smashed pieces of pottery from the Mycenaeans. Near the chapel, researchers found a sacrificial pit. In the pit were charred black animal bones, proving the mountain temple was used to hold rituals. An analysis has shown most of these rituals were held during the most tumultuous time in Greece's ancient history, the Bronze Age collapse. Animals were sacrificed at Mount Elanio's temple from 1200 to 1050 BC, according to the Greek Ministry of Culture. This was a period of enormous upheaval across Greece, the Levant, Egypt, and Cyprus. Greece's Aegean Islands were hit particularly hard. Some of the most advanced civilizations the world has ever seen made their homes on the Aegean Islands. Starting in 1200, those civilizations began to fall apart. Their cities were destroyed by invaders and natural disasters. A dark age fell on Greece. The Mycenaeans disappeared, the Bronze Age collapsed, and chaos engulfed the lands. While all this turmoil was unfolding, the people of Aegina put their faith in Zeus. They climbed the holy mountain to his sanctuary and sought peace upon its sacred peak. They sacrificed animals in hopes that Zeus would deliver them from the collapse of their entire civilization. The tribal capital of Tongwancheng. 2,300 years ago, the Xiongnu emerged in the Eurasian steppe as a confederation of powerful nomads. They were on the eastern side of the border with the Chinese Han Empire, separated from them by the Great Wall of China. The Xiongnu had little hope of defeating the Han, but they could live out their lives as an independent nation. And that was what they did at the southern edge of the Ordos Desert. What started as a nomadic confederation soon grew into the Xia Kingdom. It took about 700 years, but the Xia Kingdom firmly established itself as a regional power. Their capital was the city of Tongwancheng. The Xia kingdom's most notorious leader was Helion Bobo, founder of Tongwancheng. He had one of his generals design the city and then brought in 100,000 nomadic workers to build it. The city was a monumental metropolis made from sand and white clay, and they used some powdered rice as well. If you've never stood inside a city built from rice and sand, you're missing out. Tongwancheng looks like a melted beehive today, hardly recognizable as somewhere that people lived, but it was home to about 70,000 people. There was a palace district, government houses, and homes for the nobility. It stood like a pale termite nest in the center of a wide grassy plain. When the three little pigs built their houses, you might notice none of them used rice. It was for a very good reason. In 426, the Northern Wei attacked Tongwancheng and destroyed it. The population fled, and the whole place was abandoned. The Xiongnu people continued living in the region, but things were just too violent. In 786, Tibetan forces invaded, and the Xiongnu disappeared. Thanks for watching! Be sure to hit that subscribe button and stick around for an older video you might have missed.
The Lost Labyrinth of Egypt. In the legends of ancient Greece, they speak of a monumental maze built near the Herawa Pyramid of Egypt, known only as the Labyrinth. It was said to be a vast network of winding tunnels, deep rooms, temples, and filled to the brim with artifacts and mysterious hieroglyphics. Amazingly, it was all underground, constructed at least before the 5th century BC, when it was first spoken of by Greek historians. It was the Greek historian Herodotus who even claimed to see the labyrinth with his own eyes. The labyrinth was mentioned by multiple historians until the year 79 AD. Many people claim to have seen the labyrinth for themselves, and this inspired an excavation in 1842 organized by King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia. But it wasn't until much later, in 1888, that archaeologists actually discovered proof. Ruins were found covering a massive area and winding 6 feet below the ground, right at the base of the Herawa Pyramid. In 2008, researchers from Belgium used ground-penetrating radar to solve the mystery once and for all. On the southern side of the pyramid, they found evidence of a massive structure underground, containing tunnels and dozens of enormous rooms. It was hard to get an actual reading because groundwater had permeated the site. However, it does appear that there is indeed an enormous labyrinth, or some kind of structure, underneath the ground in front of the pyramid. Dunurra Castle. The Dunurra Castle in Scotland has been abandoned for at least 3 centuries. Before that, it was a powerful fortress occupied by the Kennedy family, who started construction on the main keep back in the early 1200s. They built it overlooking the Firth of Clyde on a rocky outcrop, which was perfect to protect against invasion. As the Kennedy family prospered, their castle became larger and larger. One member of the family married the daughter of King Robert III, while another became the Bishop of St. Andrews and founded St. Salvator's College. The main keep was expanded with a curtain wall. New buildings were added, including a chapel, a prison, and a massive living area for the family and their servants. In 1429, the castle was a meeting place between 2 warring factions in Scotland. One side represented King James I of Scotland, the other John Moore MacDonald of the Lord of the Isles. Violence broke out at the meeting, and MacDonald was killed, resulting in an uprising. About a century later, in 1563, Mary, Queen of Scots, stayed at this castle as a guest. In 1569, Gilbert Kennedy kidnapped a rival named Alan Stewart and had him roasted over an open fire inside the castle kitchens. This led to a major fight, at which point the Kennedy family was obliterated after having lived in the castle for over 300 years. It was abandoned after that, and by the 1700s was effectively a ruin. These days, it's a shell of its former mysterious glory. The castle no longer has a roof, but it remains filled with mystery and historical significance. El Tajín. El Tajín is an ancient city in the Mexican state of Veracruz, which reached its height about 1100 years ago. The city's streets fell silent in the 13th century, 700 years ago. At one point, it was the most important place in Mesoamerica. After the fall of the Teotihuacan Empire, those mysterious people who built the Great Pyramids north of Mexico City, El Tajín became the center of culture and government. Its influence was so great that it extended down the Gulf of Mexico and even affected some regions of the Maya kingdom. If you're confused about the timeline, it was the culture at El Tajín who ruled between Teotihuacan's abandonment and the rise of the Aztec. It's quite a fascinating and mysterious place because it lived for such a short time. For 400 years, a mysterious group of people with no official name created unique architecture, artwork, and held their own unique system of beliefs. There were probably up to 15,000 people living here, and they even built their own pyramids. But when the Aztecs showed up, this mysterious, unnamed civilization disappeared. Gyeonsae-dzong. The Gyeonsae-dzong fortress is one of the most fascinating remaining fortresses anywhere in Tibet. It is almost like something out of a movie scene, a large, imposing, and somewhat mythical castle standing above the small town of Gyeonsae on a jagged rise of brown rock. Historical records tell us the fortress was constructed around the year 1390 as a guard post, protecting the entrance of the Tsangpo Valley. The original fortress, which was much smaller than the one that came after, was commissioned by the anti-Buddhist ruler Langdharma sometime around the year 838. The small fortress grew larger and larger, more walls went up, and it became the powerful fortress that we still see standing today. By the end of the 14th century, Gyeonsae-dzong was a huge and mysterious fortified city and one of the most powerful places in all of Tibet. What happened between 1400 and 1900 isn't exactly known, as the people of the region mainly kept to themselves and didn't receive visitors. It wasn't until the British expedition in 1904 that the fortress was entered by foreigners. The British took the fortress over, occupied it, and ever since it's been disrupted from its history as a place of peace and isolated harmony. The Chinese even blew apart some of the walls during the Cultural Revolution of 1967. The Emperor's Pleasure Villa. The Villa of Tiberius is an ancient mansion complex and was the perfect place for the emperor to come and relax. It was famous for its unique location and was part of a cave that had salt water flowing through various pools and bathrooms, even through a dining room. Located in Sperlonga, Italy, it was first constructed during the late Republican era of Rome, probably around the year 30 BC. But it was Emperor Tiberius who expanded the site in the 1st century AD and turned it into his own personal vacation spot. He installed a gym, a series of Roman baths, docks for his boats, and pools that were fed by a nearby natural spring. It was a very posh residence, half natural caves, and embellished with artificial stalactites to make it look more exciting. Right at the cave's entrance was a dining space where Tiberius could have meals with all the most important people in the empire. To be fair, the Villa of Tiberius was not so different from many of the other villas created by crazy Roman rulers. However, this one has a really interesting twist in the tale. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote that in the year 26, Tiberius was dining in his favorite cave when the roof suddenly collapsed. The rocks at the entrance fell, many of the attendants were crushed, and Tiberius narrowly escaped with his life. He was so shaken by the experience that he abandoned his impressive villa and built a new one at Capri. He even distanced himself from the rule of the empire, handing over all the official duties to his trusted advisors. His plan was to live a life of pleasure and debauchery in the countryside while still being emperor without doing any work. But his advisors, Sejanus and Naevius Sutorius Macro, the two people he trusted the most, instead plotted to overthrow him. But Tiberius found out and ordered their immediate execution. Kamsum Yuli Namgyal Chorten. The Kamsum Yuli Namgyal Chorten is a stupa in the isolated and mysterious nation of Bhutan. It was built with the singular purpose of keeping evil forces out of the country and bringing peace to the Bhutanese, as well as the rest of the world. On the outside, the cliffside stupa, which was built above a great and misty valley on the side of a mountain, looks like it's been there for thousands of years. It appears like it's a secret retreat for monks hiding deep inside the mountain jungles of Asia. However, it's almost brand new. It was built in 2004 by the Queen of Bhutan. The reason it looks so old is that it was constructed in accordance with the traditional teachings. It took a total of 9 years for the best sculptors and carpenters in the country to finish the impressive structure, as well as the various pagodas that surround it. There are massive statues of scary and angry deities within the building. One of the main figures is Vajrakilaya, whose supernatural fury is bent towards destroying forces that are hostile to compassion. It's his power, as well as some of the other deities' powers, that are supposed to protect any evil forces from penetrating the country. And of course, there's a giant golden statue of Buddha at the very top. Even though this particular stupa's construction is quite recent, keep in mind the area in general is thousands of years old. People have been living in the mountains of Bhutan and right here in the Punakha Valley for as long as anyone can remember. London's Camelot. Camlet Moat is a small enclosure monument near the top of Ferny Hill, which is in the London borough of Barnet. It's been called London's Camelot, with some experts believing this very well could have been the place where King Arthur held court in the 12th century. Others don't believe it had any connection to King Arthur. It's all very confusing. Keep in mind that King Arthur and his court of Camelot became popularized in the 15th century in literature. Since then, no one has actually been able to confirm whether King Arthur was a real person or just a character in a fairy tale. Nonetheless, there is an account from 1440 that mentioned the Manor of Camelot being located near the site of what is today called Camlet Moat. Camlet could very well be a variation of the word Camelot, just changed over the years. There have been several archaeological discoveries made here that suggest something impressive once stood on the grounds. There are ancient structures that date back to the 12th century and a large crater which looks like it was once used as an ancient well. Excavations in the 1880s even turned up a dungeon with chains attached to the wall. They discovered the timbers from a drawbridge so rotted they had turned black. There were also tiles found adorned with paintings of knights on horseback. Then, in 1923, large square oak beams from a drawbridge were discovered and a wall of stone about 40 feet long, evidence of what was probably once a large house or a keep-like structure. In modern times, these discoveries are nowhere to be seen. Interestingly enough, no one has done any modern excavations. It is still a mystery what truly stood here 800 years ago, but it was definitely something significant. There appears to have been a large structure, a manor of some kind, surrounded by a moat and accessible via a drawbridge. This could have been Arthur's Camelot, or it could have just been a rich noble's home. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Church of the Holy Redeemer. The Church of the Holy Redeemer was built by the great prince Abulgarib Pahlavi in the ancient Armenian city of Ani in the year 1035. It's one of the only structures that still stands in the city, which is located in modern-day Turkey. Between the years 961 and 1045, this city was the capital of the powerful Bagratid Armenian kingdom. They built over 50 churches, 33 cave chapels, and 20 ordinary chapels within the city walls. It was one of the most impressive and almost supernatural religious centers of the medieval world. But the Church of the Holy Redeemer is by far the most mysterious church built here. It was built specifically to house a fragment of the true cross. Yes, it was made to be a repository for what is believed to be an actual piece of the wooden cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. Perhaps this relic is an authentic one, as the church proved to be far luckier than any of the others. After the city of Ani was destroyed by the Mongol invasion of 1236, then devastated by an earthquake in 1319, almost every single building was destroyed, except for the Church of the Holy Redeemer. It was almost as if some unseen force was keeping it standing. Ancient Miletus. Ancient Miletus is an abandoned city from ancient Greece, located in what is now Turkey, near the mouth of the Meandar River. It was first occupied in the Neolithic period around 3500 BC. Then, in the Bronze Age, a small group of settlements here turned into a centralized city. It began to trade with the Minoan civilization and flourished. Ancient Miletus turned into a great Mycenaean stronghold before eventually being conquered by the Hittites. In the latter part of the Bronze Age and in the early Iron Age, the region saw great instability. Civilizations were rising and falling every few decades. It was the end of the Hittite Empire and the Mycenaean kingdoms, and Miletus was destroyed in the chaos. Archaeological excavations have revealed the city was destroyed by a giant fire, probably at the hand of the mysterious sea people. Nobody knows what kind of battle took place here. There are no historical records of the city following its destruction at the hands of the Hittites, but since it was near the coast, and since the Sea People did move through the area, burning and looting everything they could find, they were probably responsible for its final demise. The Labyrinth of Knossos. The Great Palace of Knossos is one of the most mysterious and magical places of the ancient world. It's an archaeological gem found on the island of Crete in Greece. Not only is it a very real fortress hiding an ancient labyrinth, it's also a place from one of the most popular Greek myths that has survived over 2,000 years. As the story goes, it was the palace of King Minos who had young Athenians brought to Crete once a year to be sacrificed to the terrible Minotaur he had lurking in the labyrinth beneath. The monstrous Minotaur was half man, half bull, who only ate human flesh. The Minotaur was a punishment by the god Poseidon after King Minos tried to trick the god. His wife was seduced by a bull, and so the beast was confined to the underground labyrinth to keep it hidden from view. The tortuous maze was impossible to escape, and the young people would wander trying to get out until they were caught and ripped apart by the beast. After several years, the Athenian hero Theseus decided to sacrifice himself to try to slay the beast and save his people. He befriended the daughter of King Minos, Ariadne, who gave Theseus a ball of string that would help him find his way out. Once in the dank and dark labyrinth, Theseus was able to kill the animal and help the rest of the Athenians escape. And while this is all just part of a Greek myth, the truth is that there really was a labyrinth near this immense fortress. Archaeologists have found the ruins of an immense palace. The elaborate Palace of Knossos had no hallways, and it seemed to have thousands of rooms laid out in random order. It would have been extremely secure, but also dark and confusing unless you knew the place. The ruins of Knossos cover a massive area of about 6 acres. At one point, the walls stood at least 5 stories tall. Today, there is nothing left except ruined stone buildings and broken pieces of rooms and chambers. It was destroyed around the year 1375 BC, most likely by an earthquake. Stupa of Takht-e-Rostam. The Stupa of Takht-e-Rostam is a mysterious site in Afghanistan from before the days of Islam. As you may already know, Afghanistan was drenched in Buddhist teachings for hundreds of years before converting to Islam. Since that day, much of their Buddhist past has been destroyed. In 2001, the Bamiyan Buddhas, some of the biggest and most impressive Buddha statues in the world, were blown apart by the Taliban. And yet there is one place that remains, Takht-e-Rostam. It's a subterranean stupa carved directly into the earth, just like the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia. If you've heard the word stupa thrown around a lot, but don't actually know what it is, let me quickly explain. A stupa, for Buddhists, is a symbolic religious sanctuary. It holds the same function that a church does for Christians. It's a symbolic building where people go to practice their religious beliefs. Surrounding the main bulk of the stupa is a ditch about 24 feet deep. At its bottom is a path where Buddhist monks once walked, deep in thought, around the stupa in endless circles. Inside the stupa, there were once important Buddhist relics. It's empty now, a hollow reminder of the past. There are no decorations here, no paintings or pieces of art. The stupa is impressive because of the fact that it was built underground. As for why it was built underground, historians aren't exactly sure. They think it might have been to camouflage the monastery from invaders. If not, it was probably just a clever way of keeping the Buddhist monks cool in the hottest months. Mother Shipton's Cave. Mother Shipton's Cave was once believed to be the home of a horrible witch and prophetess who predicted disasters and knew exactly when the end of the world would be. Her name lives on as Mother Shipton, but she was allegedly born under the name Ursula Southhell. It's said her mother gave birth to her in the woodland cave, and she went on to become a very powerful and evil witch. She even had a well near her cave that was bewitched to turn objects into stone. But the true story of Mother Shipton is somewhat mythical. She was held responsible for heaps of bizarre things that happened throughout a period of around 200 years in the UK, Australia, and the US. She became so famous that her face is still used today by fortune tellers, and her name can be found on pubs all across England. The problem is that no one knows what she actually did. Mother Shipton did exist, and she did publish her prophecies in 1641. However, nobody knows if she ever really did turn a king and his men to stone. We don't know if she died 8 years before her prophecies were published. We don't even know if she truly was born in her creepy cave. What scientists have figured out is that she really did have a magical well that turned things to stone. The petrifying well that helped make the witch so famous does indeed turn things like teddy bears and hats hard as stone in about 3 months. It's because of the high mineral content of the water and natural evaporation. Things don't actually turn to stone, but they do become solid and crusty. That sounds pretty terrifying to me if I lived in 17th century England and didn't know any better. The Mozu Tombs. The Mozu Tombs near the city of Osaka in Japan are some of the most beautiful burial mounds anywhere in the world. The Mozu area contains several dozen grave sites from between the 4th and 6th centuries. They were built for the ruling elite, with the larger and more elaborate mounds signifying a higher status than those buried in the smaller ones. Makes sense, right? The largest of all the tombs was built for Emperor Nintoku Kofun. His tomb is surrounded by moats. It's over 2,400 feet long, and it's the largest grave in all of Japan. Actually, not just Japan. It's one of the largest graves in the world. And less than a mile away from it is the third largest tomb in the country, that of Emperor Richu Kofun. The area of Mozu in Sakai City is like the Giza of Japan. The enormous tomb for Emperor Nintoku is so big that it stands out in the very center of the metropolis. Because the mound is considered sacred, it's been entirely left alone by the Japanese. Covered in trees, it's not even open to the public, and as a result, the emperor's body is still safe inside his tomb. This is one example of a people who don't actually want to dig up the graves of their ancestors. The Japanese have decided to keep the emperor's body entombed out of respect. There are other tombs to consider here, though, with plenty of small and medium graves spread all across the area. The biggest mystery of all is that they were all made in the shape of a keyhole, and nobody quite knows why. Delos. Delos was once the most sacred place in all of ancient Greece. It was a trading center, an island hub in the middle of the Aegean Sea. It was in the perfect spot to meet traders from the most important cities in ancient Greece, such as Athens, Corinth, Macedonia, Rhodes, and Crete. But the history of Delos goes far beyond its rise as a trading center. The island was originally inhabited back in 3000 BC, settled for 1500 years, and then turned into a site of worship around 1580 BC. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but thousands of people started flocking to Delos in the 8th century and didn't stop for 1,000 years. People started to make up stories about the place. They believed the god Apollo was born on Delos, which brought pilgrims from all over Greece and the surrounding areas. The city's fame lasted all the way into the 1st century BC, when it peaked at around 25,000 inhabitants. That's not much today, but it was considered a lot of people back then. The city started to decline in the year 540 BC. The Athenians took over the island, ruined the Temple of Apollo, and forbid anyone to be born or to die on the island. After the Persian Wars in 478 BC, Delos prospered under the new rule of Macedon. The Romans burned the island down 400 years later in their war with the Mithridates, and by the 3rd century AD, the island was a very different place. There was a small Christian community living on Delos, its past connection to the gods of Olympus forgotten, and it faded into obscurity. Dimmu Borgir. Dimmu Borgir is an incredible lava formation in Iceland that was once said to be the entrance to the underworld. It can be found today near Mývatn Lake in the northern region of the country. It's a volcanic field of jagged rocks and caves that were formed after a devastating eruption around 2,300 years ago. When the volcano erupted, there was probably a small body of water at the site. When the water mixed with the lava, it created a unique landscape of geological features. One of the most impressive of these features is a great rock arch that locals call the church. The name of this place, although it may just sound like gibberish to you, is quite ominous. Dimmu Borgir translates to dark cities. The rock formations may be fascinating, but they were terrifying to the ancient inhabitants of Iceland. When Christians arrived on the island and beheld the black and jagged landscape of rock, they immediately connected it to the devil. They decided it was where Satan had landed after he was tossed out of heaven. Dimmu Borgir became the source of many other myths as well. It was said to be a portal to the netherworld. Traditional folklore even says the lava field was once home to an Icelandic group of trolls called the Yule Lads. What do you think of this place? Let me know in the comments below. Altar of Monte d'Acori. The altar of Monte d'Acori was once something. It was definitely once something, but archaeological experts can't fully agree on what that something was. Some say it was a viewing platform, some believe it was a prehistoric altar, and others say a step pyramid. Some even argue it was an ancient ziggurat inspired by the Babylonians. What we do know is that the earliest construction here in Sardinia dates back to 4000 BC. It was the people known as the Ozieri who laid the first stones. These were prehistoric hunter-gatherers in the midst of learning animal husbandry and practicing agriculture. They are the ones who came before the Nuragic civilization, which went on to dominate Spain for many centuries. By the end of the first phase of construction, there was a platform about 15 feet tall accessible by a ramp. It was all made of rock and earth and was extremely primitive. But whatever may have been here was destroyed in the year 3000 BC. Then, after 200 years of abandonment, a second phase of construction began. This was by a totally different culture who had become dominant in the region, the Abealzu Filijosa culture. They created a structure with a second tier, something of a step pyramid about 30 feet tall. However, we don't know what this place was used for. It continued to be occupied by the Beaker culture, but the monument was abandoned before the Nuragic Age began in 1800 BC. It wasn't discovered in modern times until the 1950s. These days, it's the closest thing to an actual pyramid anywhere in Sardinia. Big shout out to X-Stacy and Marie Krantz. Thanks so much for watching. And if you are new here, welcome! And remember to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Aggersborg. Aggersborg is the biggest Viking ring castle in Denmark. It's also one of the country's largest archaeological sites. It consists of a circular rampart and a really big ditch surrounding it. The castle is intersected at its center by 4 main roads running through it. These roads were tunneled under the outer rampart so the main structure would stay intact. They also split the fortress into 4 main quadrants. Pretty impressive engineering, huh? But none of this is still in the castle today. All that you can see when visiting the site is the outline of what once stood here. The ring castle has been completely destroyed. It once had walls over 12 feet tall and a huge rampart of soil, turf, and oak wood. But the giant fortress is completely gone. There were once 5,000 men stationed here in at least 48 longhouses, all gone. The only reason we even know there was once a giant fortress here is because the imprint of it has been left on the ground, leaving behind a sort of layout of what was once here. Archaeologists don't know what the stronghold was used for. It could have been for controlling trade moving through the region or as a training ground for Vikings. Bagan. Bagan is one of the most important ancient religious cities in Southeast Asia. You have Angkor in Cambodia, long since abandoned by the Khmer to the jungle. And then you have Bagan in Myanmar. Angkor definitely gets more tourists, but Bagan deserves some recognition as well. This mysterious place is located on the floor of a valley and contains so many exotic Buddhist temples, you would need to live here for a year to explore them all. The original kingdoms of Bagan made their appearance in the 2nd century BC. They dominated the region for over 1,000 years before it finally entered its golden age under the rule of King Anawrahta in 1057. Then, until 1287, when the forces of Kublai Khan overran the area, over 13,000 temples and other religious structures were built here. Pagodas, stupas, everything you can imagine. And now, 700 years later, there are still 2,200 of them remaining. The river washed away about a third of them. Thieves looking for treasure destroyed the others, and time ruined the rest. What's truly incredible is that even with so few temples remaining, Bagan is a sight to behold like none other. It's hard to imagine what it would have looked like 700 years ago when there were 11,000 more temples to look at. Do you want to visit this place? Let me know in the comments below. Camulodunum. Before the Romans arrived in Britain in the year 43 AD, the area of what is today Colchester was occupied by the Trinovantes. Later, they were replaced by the Catuvelauni tribes, who constructed a stronghold that they called Camulodunum. In the local language, it meant the stronghold of Camulus, which was in reference to a mysterious Brythonic deity who may have been very similar to the Roman deity Mars. Have you ever heard of these tribes before? In the 1st century, the Catuvelauni was one of the major tribes in Britain. This put a huge target on their backs when the Romans arrived. They wasted no time in attacking the tribesmen and taking over their lands. The Romans then built their very first British legionary fortress at Camulodunum. After the year 49, the fortress was no longer needed because the Romans were in full control of the area. It was converted into a civilian town and used as something of a relaxation point for discharged legionnaires. But then, a decade later, in the year 60, a sudden uprising led by Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribal coalition completely destroyed the city. Not only did they destroy Camulodunum, but they also burned down Londinium, what is modern-day London, and more. But the story for this city wasn't over. It declined in the 4th century as the Roman Empire crumbled, but it remained occupied and is still occupied today. In the city of Colchester, the ruins of Camulodunum can still be seen if you look hard enough. The Gila Cliff Dwellings. The Gila Cliff Dwellings were built in the late 1200s by desert-dwelling Puebloans. They crafted their homes in natural caves and overhangs in the dry and dusty landscape of what is now New Mexico. This was about 700 years ago, and today we have no idea what happened to them. We know they were part of the Mogollon culture, but that they lasted less than a century in the Gila wilderness. They built their mysterious cliff dwellings in the 1280s and vanished by the early 1300s. What's truly interesting is that archaeologists believe there was only one generation of people here. This is based on the number of houses and the few artifacts that were left behind. There were likely 8 or 10 families who carved the cliff dwellings and lived in them for a single generation. They grew squash and corn nearby in the river, hunted wild game, and made pottery. But within just one generation, they abandoned their farms, their homes, and dispersed to unknown lands. Have you ever visited one of the many ancient cliff dwellings in the United States? Let me know about your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!